In the grand theatre of the earth, where deserts breathe history and rivers carry the whispers of time, two ancient nations, Israel and Iran, stand at a precipice. Their conflict, like the clash of tectonic plates beneath the crust, threatens to shake the foundations of our world. Some ask, in hushed tones and fearful eyes, is this the moment foretold? Is Ezekiel 38, a vision penned in dusty scrolls millennia ago, now unfolding before our very eyes? But as with every chapter in nature's story, we must look deeper, not merely at the spectacle of conflict, but at the rhythms beneath it of history, of belief, of prophecy, and of hope. For even in turmoil, the earth continues to spin, the sun still rises, and within humanity, a light still flickers, waiting to be fanned into a flame. In the vast, shifting terrain of our planet, conflict has always been a part of nature. It is the silent competition between trees in a dense forest, each reaching skyward for a sliver of sunlight. It is the silent standoff between lions on the savannah, where dominance is never granted, only taken. So two nations, ancient and proud, exist in a constant state of tension, woven by the thread of history and drawn by the forces of geography, culture, belief, and survival. Among these, few rivalries are as charged, as fraught with consequence, as that between Israel and Iran. Their story is not one born merely of modern politics or military ambition. It is a tale rooted deep in time, in identity, in the ancient struggle for meaning, space, and sovereignty. Israel, a small but resolute nation, has carved itself from adversity and diaspora into a place of modern innovation and ancient faith. Surrounded by countries that have not always welcomed its presence, it exists like a tree that has found a crack in the rock, thriving not because conditions were ideal, but because it refused to wither. Iran, by contrast, is vast and formidable. Once the heart of empires, Persia, the cradle of poets, mystics, and warriors, it carries the dignity and pride of millennia. It is a nation of paradoxes, where ancient Zoroastrian ruins sleep beneath the weight of modern cities, and where its people live with the memory of kings, prophets, and revolution. Iran sees itself not merely as a country among others, but as a civilization, a guardian of a worldview, a force in the region with a right, if not a destiny, to influence. And so, like great animals drawn to a contested watering hole, these two nations find themselves in a tense proximity. They are not neighbors in the cartographic sense, but their actions, their policies, and their fears ripple toward one another across deserts and seas. Iran supports groups and militias sworn against the existence of Israel. Israel, perceiving the gathering storm, strikes with precision, seeking to prevent what it sees as existential threats. One acts from ideology, the other from survival. But both are locked in a pattern familiar to the natural world, the standoff. But unlike the fleeting duels of animals, this is not a conflict that ends with a victor walking away. This tension has become chronic, embedded in the very structure of their politics and their posture to the world. It is not simply about land or power. It is about worldview. It is about prophecy, identity, destiny. For many in the region, and indeed for many watching across the globe, their struggle feels not political, but biblical. And so, we ask, is it inevitable? Is this conflict hardwired into their DNA as nations? The answer, I believe, is more nuanced. In nature, conflict often serves a purpose. It regulates populations, maintains balance, clears the way for new growth. But nature also evolves. It adapts. It finds unexpected moments of symbiosis and peace. Birds once hunted by hawks learn to share the same tree in different seasons. Rivers once divided by drought find new confluence after a flood. Israel and Iran are not beasts of instinct. They are nations of thinkers, poets, scientists, parents. Their people do not crave war. They crave meaning, safety, dignity. The leaders may thunder with threats, but the average man or woman in Tehran, in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem or Isfahan, dreams not of warplanes but of peace, of family, of a tomorrow worth waking up to. Yet the machinery of mistrust moves quietly but efficiently. Weapons are developed, alliances cemented, red lines drawn in invisible ink. Each side justifies its fear by the other's preparation. Like two rams, horns locked, but neither willing to yield, they dance the dangerous steps of escalation. One miscalculation, one spark, and the entire region, like a dry savanna in high summer, could ignite. And it is here we must pause, not to take sides, not to predict outcomes, but to reflect on the profound fragility of this moment. Just as in the wild, where balance can be shattered by a single invasive species, the balance of nations can be undone by a single mistake. But unlike the creatures of the forest or the plain, we have something they do not foresight: memory, wisdom, the capacity not just to react, but to reflect. We must learn from the natural world, not its conflicts, but its resilience, the way coral reefs regrow after being battered by storms, the way ancient redwoods stand tall through centuries of wind and fire. Nations, too, can evolve beyond conflict, but it begins with seeing one another not as enemies fated to destroy, but as rivals capable of restraint, capable of change. Israel and Iran are not trapped by prophecy. They are not beasts destined to clash. They are stewards of civilizations, inheritors of great wisdom, and in that truth lies a sliver of hope, fragile as a sprouting seed, yet powerful enough, if nurtured, to split stone. Ezekiel 38, a chapter from ancient scripture obscure to some, ominous to others, has, in recent years, found new breath. It speaks of a great northern coalition rising against Israel, a convergence of nations led by mysterious names: Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. To the modern eye, these names are antiquated, shrouded in mystery and myth. But to those who watch the world through a prophetic lens, they seem to echo faintly in the corridors of today's geopolitics. Some look at the alignments forming in the Middle East and beyond, and ask the question aloud: could this be it? Is Ezekiel's vision unfolding before our eyes? To examine such a possibility requires a certain humility. The language of prophecy is poetic, not precise, symbolic, not literal. It belongs to a genre of human thought that blends spiritual insight with historical pattern. And yet, its enduring power lies in its ability to speak across generations, to warn, to awaken, and sometimes to comfort. In Ezekiel's vision, there is no doubt a vast army comes against Israel, and the world holds its breath. But the outcome is not one of defeat, nor is it dependent on human strength. The intervention is divine. The message is unmistakable. Even in overwhelming darkness, light prevails. In the quiet moments of reflection, one begins to see that the significance of Ezekiel 38 is not in its line-by-line prediction of modern war. Rather, it is in its pattern: the rising of alliances, the appearance of existential threats, the perception of Israel as a focal point of global attention. These themes feel eerily familiar today. Nations aligning in ways that mirror the ancient names: Russia, Persia, Kush. The tensions growing around Israel. The rhetoric, the fear, the sense of something building, slowly but surely. But prophecy, like nature, is layered and subtle, just as the migration of birds can signal not just the change of season, but the health of an ecosystem. So too can the rise of geopolitical storms point not just to biblical fulfillment, but to deeper truths about humanity's course. The question is not only whether Ezekiel 38 is happening now, but why we are drawn to believe that it might be. What is it in us that hears war drums and remembers ancient scrolls? It is perhaps a deep intuition that history is not random, that beneath the chaos there is a rhythm, a spiritual undertone guiding the story. For some, that rhythm is confirmation of faith. For others, it is a warning. And still for others, it is a call to reconsider what it means to live in prophetic times. If this conflict is part of something larger, then our role is not simply to observe it with fear or fascination, but to respond with clarity and courage, to become not merely spectators of unfolding prophecy, but participants in the shaping of peace. There is another element within Ezekiel's vision, often overlooked: the restoration of Israel. The people gathered from many nations, brought back to their land, dwelling in safety before the storm comes. This, too, has happened in our time. The reconstitution of Israel in 1948, the waves of return from diaspora, the astonishing survival against repeated onslaughts. These events have stirred the minds and hearts of theologians and skeptics alike. Could such a restoration truly be coincidence? Or are we witnessing the unfolding of something ancient, something sacred? And yet, the prophecy does not end with conflict. The storm, though terrible, is not the final word. There is an awakening, both of Israel and of the nations. There is a revelation, a recognition, a turning. This, perhaps, is the heart of the message. That even in the most perilous moments, when nations rise and fall, when the world seems ready to break, there is a force greater than armies, a divine presence that guides history, not always visibly, not always immediately, but certainly. In this sense, Ezekiel 38 is not just a prophecy of doom, but a vision of hope. It is a reminder that though the world may tremble, it is not abandoned. Though evil may gather strength, it is not without limit. And though humanity may lose its way, the compass still points north. It invites us not to panic, but to prepare, not for destruction, but for discernment. We must look, then, not only to the headlines, but to the heart. What kind of world are we shaping? What role do we play in this unfolding drama? Are we fanning the flames of division or planting seeds of peace? Are we listening only to the thunder or also to the whisper, the quiet voice of conscience, of compassion, of wisdom? The question, is Ezekiel 38 happening now? May never be answered with certainty. But perhaps that's not the point. The real power of prophecy lies not in prediction, but in preparation. It urges us to awaken, to observe, to act with humility and courage, to recognize that even in the darkest clouds there is purpose, even in the storm there is design, and even in the most ancient texts there is relevance for today. So let us not look to Ezekiel merely to decode the future, but to understand the present. Let it be a mirror, a guide, and most of all, a call, not to fear, but to faith, not to fatalism, but to responsibility. For if we are indeed living in prophetic times, then we must be prophetic people, not by shouting from rooftops, but by walking with wisdom, seeking peace, and remembering that even in the storm, we are not alone. In the intricate web of global relations, the Middle East stands as one of the most delicate and volatile regions, a place where ancient rivalries, religious convictions, and modern geopolitics converge. At the very heart of this tension lies a fragile balance of power, much like the equilibrium found in nature. One need only look to the coral reef or the rainforest to understand how quickly such balance can be disrupted. A single shift, a rise in temperature, a change in the flow of nutrients, the introduction of an unfamiliar predator, can set off a cascade of irreversible change. So it is with nations, alliances, and ideologies. Israel and Iran are positioned on opposite ends of a tense geopolitical spectrum. Israel, with its sophisticated defense systems, strategic alliances, and technological might, is a nation ever vigilant, acutely aware of its geographic and demographic vulnerabilities. Iran, with its regional influence, ideological resolve, and growing arsenal, positions itself as both a spiritual and political counterweight. Between them lies a region already cracked with tension. Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Gaza, each a fault line where the plates of these two nations grind against one another. What makes the current moment so precarious is the sheer interconnectedness of global power structures. Iran is not alone. It is backed, to varying degrees, by countries such as Russia and China, both of which view Middle Eastern affairs through the lens of their own global ambitions. Israel, too, is not isolated. It enjoys strong support from the United States and has been quietly building diplomatic bridges with several Arab nations. These alignments are not unlike the interconnected food chains of a vast ecosystem. What affects one node affects the whole. And yet, within this balance, there exists a paradox. The more each side prepares for the worst, the more likely the worst becomes. Deterrence, once meant to prevent aggression, can morph into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Missiles are positioned. Intelligence is gathered. Cyber capabilities are quietly deployed. And all the while, the weight of fear grows heavier. Like two predators circling each other in the wild, each watching the other's movements with acute suspicion, the room for misinterpretation becomes dangerously wide. The history of conflict shows us that war is rarely the result of grand design. It is more often the consequence of a misstep, a misunderstanding, a moment of overconfidence or misjudgment. In a region as tightly wound as the Middle East, one spark, a drone shot down, a general assassinated, a border crossed, could ignite a firestorm that draws in actors far beyond the region itself. We are not merely watching regional disputes, we are watching the potential unraveling of a global balance. This is why the comparison to natural systems is so profound. Nature teaches us that balance is both beautiful and temporary. A predator that overhunts collapses its own food source. A river redirected for gain may flood its banks in protest. The same is true of nations. A power unchecked eventually provokes a coalition. A people oppressed eventually resist. The world does not exist in stasis. It reacts, it rebalances, often violently. But just as nature can be thrown into chaos, it also holds within it the secrets of resilience. Ecosystems can recover. Forests regrow, species adapt. The same possibility exists for nations. The balance between Israel and Iran does not have to end in war. It can evolve into a tense but stable coexistence, much like the way mountain lions and deer learn to coexist within the boundaries of a protected reserve. It requires restraint, patience, and above all, wisdom. Leaders must see beyond the immediacy of power and into the long arc of consequence. The pursuit of short-term dominance, if achieved through destruction, will ultimately leave both sides weakened. The real victory lies not in annihilating an enemy, but in building a structure where peace becomes more advantageous than conflict. This is not naive idealism, it is strategic realism. Every missile fired, every life lost, every city destroyed. These are not just statistics. They are threads in the fabric of civilization being pulled loose. The great tragedy is that such wisdom often emerges only after catastrophe. Hiroshima taught the world the cost of unchecked ambition. The ruins of Berlin, the fields of Ronda, the shattered streets of Aleppo. These are all monuments to the moments when balance was lost and humanity forgot its shared fragility. Must we wait for another such moment before we recalibrate? In the realm of geopolitics, just as in nature, the most successful systems are those that learn, adapt, and seek harmony rather than dominance. Israel and Iran, for all their history and differences, are not condemned to endless conflict. Their fates are not locked in prophecy or pride. They can choose a different path. It will not be easy, it may not be swift. But it is possible. The world watches this balance with apprehension, and rightly so. For if it tips too far in either direction, the consequences will not be contained within regional borders. They will ripple outward, affecting markets, migrations, and the moral consciousness of the planet. We are all, in a sense, part of this delicate ecosystem of nations. And as such, we share not only its risks, but its responsibilities. So let us be vigilant, yes, but also visionary. Let us study the natural balance, not just to admire it, but to learn from it. For in its quiet wisdom lies a lesson too urgent to ignore. What we preserve today may be the peace we rely upon tomorrow. In the darkest corners of the forest, after the fire has swept through, when all seems lost and barren, life has a way of returning. A small green shoot pierces the ash-covered ground. A bird calls out over the silence. And slowly, quietly, hope is reborn. This is one of nature's greatest truths, that devastation is not the end. It is often the beginning. In the same way, even in the midst of global tensions, war posturing, and apocalyptic prophecy, a quiet, resilient hope emerges, not loud or obvious, but persistent and alive. The conflict between Israel and Iran is, on the surface, a narrative of hostility, of brinkmanship, of irreconcilable ideologies. And yet, look more closely, and another story begins to unfold, a story not of weapons or war rooms, but of people. Within both nations live millions of ordinary individuals who do not dream of conquest or destruction. They dream of peace, of security, of a better life for their children. And in this shared longing lies the seed of hope. One might expect that in times of intense conflict, hope would wither. That when nations threaten each other, when the spectre of war looms, people retreat into despair. But history tells us otherwise. During the darkest days of past wars, World War II, the Cold War, the Balkan conflicts, there were always those who lit candles in the dark, who smuggled food to enemies, who wrote poetry in bunkers, who believed that beyond the smoke the stars still shone. So it is today. Though the drums of conflict beat, there are those, quietly and courageously, who still believe in the possibility of peace. Hope in this context is not naive. It does not ignore the seriousness of the situation. Rather, it stands in defiance of it. It is a form of resistance. And just as ecosystems adapt to survive even the harshest climates, human beings carry within them the extraordinary capacity to envision a future better than the present. It is this vision that keeps movements alive, that inspires dialogue, that opens the smallest of cracks in the hardest of walls. In Israel, there are voices, artists, activists, scholars, who speak not of vengeance, but of reconciliation. In Iran, despite censorship and repression, there are poets and citizens who question the direction of their leaders, who seek a future in which coexistence, not confrontation, defines their relationship with the world. These individuals may not hold power in a political sense, but they carry something more enduring moral influence, the power to imagine peace when war seems inevitable. Nature often shows us that the most beautiful transformations begin in silence. A caterpillar in its cocoon does not declare its metamorphosis, it simply becomes. Likewise, moments of reconciliation between enemies rarely begin with grand treaties or public announcements. They begin with quiet gestures, a ceasefire, a shared project, a whispered apology. They begin with the recognition of shared humanity. Even among governments, there are subtle signs. Diplomacy may falter in public, but in the back rooms and behind closed doors, conversations often continue. Back-channel talks, humanitarian negotiations, exchange of prisoners. These are not signs of weakness, they are glimpses of hope. They suggest that beneath the armor and rhetoric, the instinct to survive coexists with the instinct to evolve. Hope does not demand certainty. It simply requires the courage to believe that another way is possible. And when we look beyond the headlines, beyond the threats and troop movements, we begin to see the glimmers, refugees who forgive their captors, former enemies who embrace, nations who rebuild together. We see in small but meaningful ways that the human spirit is more resilient than any weapon and more enduring than any ideology. The prophecy of Ezekiel 38, which has stirred so much conversation, ends not with endless conflict, but with awakening. The invaders are defeated not by Israel's hand alone, but by a force greater than any nation. And then comes a moment of recognition, of divine presence, of moral clarity. It is in this aftermath that true hope lies, for prophecy is not a blueprint of doom, but a call to attention, a warning meant to redirect, not condemn. It urges us not to despair, but to discern. Hope, then, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in spite of it. It is the choice to see possibility where others see inevitability. In a world that often feels on the brink, this choice becomes radical, revolutionary, and necessary. The path forward will not be smooth. There will be setbacks. There will be provocations, escalations, and losses. But just as a scorched forest can one day become a thriving habitat once more, so too can regions ravaged by conflict be reborn. We have seen it in Europe, once torn apart by world wars, now largely united. We have seen it in South Africa, where reconciliation triumphed over division. And we can see it again, even in the Middle East. The key is to nurture the small beginnings, to listen to the unheard, to amplify the voices of those who plant olive trees instead of laying mines, and to believe stubbornly that even in the midst of fear, hope can rise. For just as day follows night, peace, however distant, is not beyond reach. And like that green shoot in the blackened forest, it begins slowly, quietly. But once it takes root, it can transform the landscape. Humanity, despite its divisions and discord, remains bound by an invisible thread. A shared existence on a single, fragile planet. The conflict between Israel and Iran, as consuming and complex as it may seem, is not merely a regional matter. It is a mirror reflecting our global condition, a concentrated expression of the challenges faced by a species still learning how to coexist. In the shadow of war, amidst the fury of political rhetoric and ancient rivalries, there lies a deeper, more profound truth: we are one. Strip away the layers of language, religion, culture, and politics, and what remains is something profoundly simple: human life. The same breath fills the lungs of a child in Tehran and a mother in Tel Aviv. The same blood pulses through the hearts of farmers, teachers, poets, and soldiers on both sides of the divide. The instinct to protect, to hope, to mourn, to love, it is not exclusive to any tribe or nation. It is universal. And yet throughout history, we have allowed our differences to eclipse this unity. In nature, species do not survive in isolation. The lion depends on the antelope on the grass on the rain. Every organism, from the smallest insect to the largest whale, is part of a system in which the well-being of one affects the well-being of all. Humanity is no different. Our survival is linked, not just biologically through shared air and water, but socially, economically, spiritually. In our age of nuclear weapons and global interdependence, the illusion of separateness is no longer just false, it is dangerous. The Israel-Iran conflict illustrates this reality with sobering clarity. A confrontation between these two nations would not be confined to their borders. It would draw in allies, disrupt economies, displace millions, and threaten the delicate geopolitical balances that touch every corner of the world. A missile launched in the Middle East may well echo through the markets of Asia, the capitals of Europe, and the hearts of parents in every hemisphere. The idea that we can compartmentalize conflict in a globalized world is, at best, outdated, and at worst, catastrophic. But if conflict reveals our interconnection in its darkest form, then peace offers us its brightest. Cooperation between former enemies has transformed entire regions. Trade, education, cultural exchange, these are not mere niceties, they are the ligaments that hold the body of humanity together. When we remember that every border is artificial, that every flag is a human invention, we begin to see the world more clearly, not as a chessboard of rival states, but as a shared home. The question then becomes, how do we reclaim this perspective in a time of division? The answer begins, perhaps, not in politics, but in empathy, the ability to imagine the life of another. To step, even briefly, into their shoes is the foundation of every just society. When we empathize, we disarm. We stop seeing enemies and start seeing stories, families, dreams. It is easy to fear what we do not understand. It is harder to hate someone whose laughter sounds like our own. This is not to deny the real and serious challenges that exist between nations. Iran and Israel have legitimate fears, deep grievances, and competing visions of the future. But conflict becomes inevitable only when we refuse to recognize the humanity of the other. When we reduce people to labels, terrorist, aggressor, infidel, Zionist, we lose the most essential part of the dialogue, the person, and without that, no solution is possible. We must learn to speak a new language, not one of slogans and threats, but one of shared values. Security, yes, but not at the expense of dignity. Identity, yes, but not as a weapon against others. Justice, yes, but not as vengeance. This language must be spoken not just in parliaments and presidencies, but in schools, on screens, in stories. It must become part of our global consciousness, replacing the old narratives of endless enmity with new ones of cautious but determined hope. There is a moment in nature, after the storm has passed, when everything is still. The trees, though battered, remain standing. The rivers, though swollen, continue their flow, and in that silence, life begins again. This moment is possible for us too. But we must choose it. we must recognize that the path of violence leads not to resolution, but to ruin. That in dividing ourselves, we only fracture the whole, and that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of understanding. In the end, what unites us is far greater than what divides us. The same sun rises over Jerusalem and Shiraz. The same stars shine over Haifa and Mashhad. The same earth holds our steps, and the same sky watches over our lives. We are, as the astronauts once said when they looked back at the earth, not Israelis or Iranians, not Muslims or Jews, but simply earthlings. Let us hold on to that image. Let us carry it into every negotiation, every headline, every conversation about war and peace. For if we remember our shared humanity, we just might remember how to live together. Not as enemies, but as neighbors. Not as rivals, but as relatives. Not as strangers, but as one. In times of crisis, when the winds of war begin to howl and prophecy captures the public imagination, the natural instinct is to look outward. To news headlines, to leaders, to maps that change with every escalation. But just as in nature the most profound shifts often occur beneath the surface, so too must our response to conflict come not only from governments or generals, but from within ourselves. The Israel-Iran conflict, and the larger prophetic narrative many associate with it, is not just a call to observe history. It is a summons to reflect and to act with clarity, courage, and conscience. Throughout the natural world, moments of upheaval are rarely without purpose. A volcanic eruption, though violent, enriches the soil. A flood, though devastating, reshapes the land for future growth. Likewise, global tension may seem only destructive, but it also presents an opportunity. A moment to re-examine who we are, what we value, and what kind of world we are building. It asks each of us, will we be passive witnesses to unfolding tragedy, or will we step forward, however quietly, to be agents of wisdom and change? Watching war unfold or fearing its arrival often leads to a paralysis of spirit. We become spectators, overwhelmed by the complexity, numbed by repetition, resigned to inevitability. But resignation is the enemy of moral progress. It is the lie that whispers, "There is nothing you can do." And history has shown, time and time again, that even in the face of vast forces, the actions of individuals matter. One voice can begin a movement. One act of courage can halt injustice. One moment of clarity can change the course of history. The story of Ezekiel 38, often cited in moments like these, is indeed dramatic. Nations assembling, war looming, divine intervention breaking through the darkness. But beyond the vivid imagery lies a deeper message. Prophecy, in its truest form, is not about prediction. It is about perception. It is a divine lens through which we are meant to view our world not with dread, but with discernment. Not to passively await catastrophe, but to actively seek a better way. Ezekiel's vision does not suggest that humanity is without agency. Rather, it highlights what happens when we ignore our responsibility to one another. It portrays what unfolds when pride replaces humility, when nations harden their hearts, when power becomes a god unto itself. And so, while the story warns of conflict, it also holds within it a challenge. What will we do in the face of impending crisis? Will we deepen the divisions, or will we bridge them? Nature offers no neutrality when balance is disturbed. It reacts, shifts, evolves. Humanity must do the same. In this time of rising tensions, we are each called to play a role, not necessarily on a battlefield or in a palace, but in the quiet spaces where culture is shaped, our conversations, our prayers, our choices. We shape the future not just through grand gestures, but through the values we uphold, the lies we reject, and the hope we dare to protect. To act in this context does not always mean to protest or to petition. Sometimes, action begins with the decision to listen deeply, to seek understanding of the other, to study history not for blame, but for insight, to recognize that peace is not forged in certainty, but in humility. It is easy to demonize what we do not know. It is much harder, and much more powerful, to reach across the chasm and ask, what do you fear? What do you love? What do you need? This is the humanizing act that breaks cycles of enmity, and it is something we can all participate in, whether through writing, teaching, dialogue, or simply refusing to repeat narratives of hatred. Each of us becomes part of the great rebalancing. We may not command armies, but we command influence in our homes, in our communities, in our spheres of trust. And influence, when shaped by compassion and clarity, is a force far greater than fear. There is also a spiritual call in all of this. The ancient prophets were not simply predictors of doom. They were moral visionaries. They called people back to justice, to mercy, to the truth that no nation stands secure when it builds its future on cruelty or pride. This is as true now as it was then. The call is not to obsess over signs and timelines, but to return to first principles, to remember that the highest form of prophecy is not foretelling the future, but living rightly in the present. And so, in this critical hour, as the world tilts uncertainly between escalation and diplomacy, between fear and faith, the most powerful thing we can do is not panic, but prepare, not for survival alone, but for transformation. To become better stewards of the truth, more courageous seekers of justice, more faithful protectors of life, for the world is watching, not just governments and armies, but each one of us. And the story of this conflict and all others will be written not only in treaties or weapons, but in the quiet decisions made in the hearts of ordinary people. Decisions to forgive, to learn, to reach out, to hope. As with all things in nature, balance will be restored. The question is whether we will be the force that brings it or the reason it was needed. Let us choose wisely. Let us live as if the future depends on us, because in truth it does.